People have wrestled with this feeling bereft, like, wait a second, I used to be able to tell my kids, well, this is our standard because that's what the church says is the standard. And now the church doesn't necessarily state what the standard is or should be. And so what does that do to us as people? And that means we have to be pretty principled. We have to be secure in our own, like we're not doing it just to fit in.
Right.
We're doing it because we own it.
It forces you as the parent to have to have an actual purpose behind it rather than just saying, well, the church says so, so that's what we're going to do. And I think that that's the value in what we're talking about here, is having your own conviction of each different principle and policy.
This is where it also becomes tricky, is that not all applications are equal. There will be many who apply the gospel in not so good ways.
When the checklist disappears, I think that reveals your true character. When the for strength of youth things are gone, or when we don't have the church telling us to do every single little thing in the handbook the specific way, it reveals our true character as far as what kind of real conversion do we have individually.
Welcome to the No Bushel Podcast. I am Big Ben, Burning Bushman, your hosts. Today we are going to be talking about what, Kendall?
Today we're going to be talking about change and standing firm in our principles and our own individual beliefs. But when change occurs in some policies or viewpoints or policies and kind of rules, as we talked last time about fence laws and things like that, making sure that we are not judging others for their own individual interpretations of that change, and making sure that we are rooted in our own personal convictions and standing firm in that, but also extending a hand of grace and charity to the people around us. So, kind of a brief synopsis of what we're going to get into today.
Perfect. So please like and subscribe, get this out to your friends, family, and let's start maybe about why this is important right now.
Yeah.
Because from my perspective, many people are feeling a little bereft. What I mean by that is, over the last 5-ish years, really since President Nelson became prophet, I feel like, the church systematically has reduced its prescriptive guidance. Mm-hmm. And it's across the board, basically, on everything. So, like, a lot of people were aware of For Strength of Youth when it changed the 2022 edition, and it took out a lot of the specific prescriptive rules or guidelines. And so that kind of made people like, well, okay, well, what do I do now? What do I do now? But the same thing has applied even across the handbooks. Mm-hmm. Handbooks have been changed such that they're not giving as much direct guidance. It's all like guiding principles and follow the Spirit.
Right.
And so across the church, I think people have wrestled with this feeling bereft, like, wait a second, I used to be able to tell my kids, well, this is our standard because that's what the church says is the standard. And now the church doesn't necessarily state what the standard is or should be. And so what does that do to us as people? First off, we need to be sure that we're rooted not on the application, but we need to be rooted on the doctrine and the guiding principles. I think we've talked about that to some degree in the past. But then we need to recognize, well, many people have felt like, well, okay, if the church isn't setting a guideline, well, maybe there is no guideline, and maybe I can just do whatever I want to. Mm-hmm. And they like feel this freedom of like, yeah, some people like that. They're like, oh, heck yes, I can just go do whatever I want to, right? Which is not always a good idea either. Mm-hmm. But out of necessity of that, we as individuals and as parents and families, we need to set proper application based on guiding core principles and doctrines for our families. And because the church has really pushed that back to families to decide, we have to, there will of necessity of that be differences in how we view things. So maybe I still do this sometimes, but there used to be a lot of at least for me. I will. I'm not going to speak for you, Kendall, but for me, if you went to church and someone was dressed a certain way, or somebody, little things like, someone had multiple piercings, or someone had, I don't know, colored hair, or somebody had, like whatever it was, like,
Yeah.
and there was kind of this immediate, like, oh, you must not be a good member of the church.
Mm-hmm. There's an automatic judgment.
There was an automatic judgment there.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this is one of the benefits of this de-prescriptive value, is that we're less judgmental of others, or at least we should be. But we're still early in this phase, and I think that as time goes on, we're going to see more and more differences in how members are applying core principles of the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I might choose to do with my family might be different than what you might choose to do, and what the elders quorum president might choose to do, and what so-and-so might choose to do. And that means we have to be pretty principled. We have to be secure in our own, like, we're not doing it just to fit in.
Right.
We're doing it because we own it.
Because that's how I believe, that's what I feel. But also knowing that because of my principles and the way that I have interpreted those policies and guidelines, that's my interpretation. Your interpretation may be different, and I have to be not just comfortable enough in my own interpretation to stick with that, but to be comfortable enough to say, we can have a difference of opinion and we're still good people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just because you don't follow that particular guideline specific way that I have chosen to do, and I feel good about the way I've done it, does not mean that how you're doing it is the right or wrong way. We can live our lives very differently and still be good, wholesome people overall. You touch on something that I think is really important as a parent specifically, that I want to highlight, and it's a difficult thing because as parents there is no guidebook, right? Like,
Yep.
I mean, there's a million books out there that people have
Mm-hmm.
written and whatnot, but there's not. I mean, you're really figuring it out on your own, right? And as you go, you learn as you go, and we can fall into the trap of holding on to those guidelines that have been given. So, for instance, you mentioned for Strength of Youth. This is kind of an easy one to point to that has recently changed. We can fall into the trap of saying, well, the for Strength of Youth pamphlet for the longest time has said XYZ. Don't have extra piercings, don't have tattoos, don't date before you're 16, or whatever the rule is. But as soon as that guidance is gone, those rules are gone, then your kid can say, well, it doesn't say that anymore, so I can do it, right? And then as a parent, I have to sit back and think, am I going to stick to my ways because I'm just the old guy that's got to stick to my guns just to, stick it to my kid?
This is the way I did it. You got to do it the same way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or am I going to have? What's the purpose for why I've got this rule? And you can continue to keep the same rules, just because it doesn't say that you can't, or that just because the rules don't say now in the first Strength of Youth, no piercings, no tattoos, no dating at 16, doesn't mean you still can't have those as your teachings and principles that your rules for your family that you teach your kids. But it forces you as the parent to have to have an actual purpose behind it, rather than just saying, well, the church says so that's what we're going to do. And I think that's the value in what we're talking about here, is having your own conviction of each different principle and policy that you live your life by, rather than just having somebody else tell you what to do and how to do it.
And the only way that you'll have conviction in it is if you're grounded in the root doctrine and core principles.
Yeah.
And if over time you realize this doesn't quite fit my understanding of doctrine, well, then you switch.
You can change.
And you change it to something that seems more aligned to your sense of teaching and doctrine. So this is something that different individuals on different topics, some people will actually be stricter in how they live certain principles. And in other cases, they'll be more flexible in how they live certain principles. And we need to, I would almost say that we as a church, I think people still feel like this little wrestle of what's okay, what's not okay. And I start seeing all these other things I'm just waiting for summer when we start seeing all the women wearing sleeveless dresses or things of that nature. And there's going to be many who are a little bit offended by that. And there's going to be some that are totally okay with that. But we need to have grace for each other.
Yes.
Through that process, because for me, it's a hyper focus on the application as opposed to the core doctrine and gospel principles and somebody's heart. The more that we can judge people based on what's in their heart, more than what's their specific action is. So, maybe just citing a couple of examples where my family has tried to do this. So, my family eats very differently than a lot of people. We eat very, very little meat. We eat a very plant-strong diet, and it's not really, while to some degree it's for health purposes, it's really, it was spiritually led. We felt very, very strongly that for our family, we needed a change of diet. And to us, it correlates with the word of wisdom. We kind of went back to our core roots and basis for that. We felt like everything was lined up with that. And for our family, it's been a huge blessing, and we love that. But just because we are principled on that, does that mean that, and I might even advocate for it. I might, tell other people that they should eat that way or whatnot. But does that mean that I judge other people for not eating that way? Absolutely not. I totally understand and get how it can be viewed different ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I can be principled in my own approach to living the word of wisdom while still understanding that other people have different understandings of it.
Yeah, definitely. And that speaks to the individual revelation and inspiration that we each can get. Like you said, for you guys, you have had this change in your diet that has been pretty dramatic. I mean, for someone that's on the outside looking into it, but also being familiar with your family, it's a big shift, and it affects everything that you guys do, right? And how you guys have dinners and interact with other people for social events and things. And we can choose to, for your perspective, you may not want to push it too much on somebody else, because then they feel like, well, maybe they are. If you push it too much on me, then maybe you feel like I'm judging Kendall because he's not following my. But then also on the flip side, I can do the same thing and be like, well, you guys are doing this totally new thing, this weird thing, and I don't feel that inspiration to go that direction with my diet. So when we get together to eat dinner, do you feel like I'm a sinner because I'm, and I don't, because we are,
Yep.
we're on good terms with that. But you can see how that can be portrayed, or how those feelings the judgment can be perceived, even though it's not usually. I think this is a key. Oftentimes, judgment is not verbally given, but it is perceived. Where I can show up to dinner with you and I can just have these thoughts in my head like, oh, he's got to be looking at me thinking, this guy is just nuts because he's having that burger instead of these veggies or whatever it is, and we can laugh about our differences.
I actually had at a family reunion, my brother-in-law he's a big meat eater, and he's more keto oriented. And so, we're sitting having a meal, and I've got my food and he's got his food. For me, I feel like it helps to verbalize, just want you to know, we eat totally differently. And I think that's great. I don't have any problem with the way you eat. And I just want you to know that, because I feel like there's this unverbal judgment that we feel sometimes because it's not voiced. And I think the same thing applies at church for simple things. Everything from whether, when someone's wearing Sunday clothes all day long on Sabbath, or when somebody has multiple piercings versus one piercing. We have missionaries in my ward who have multiple piercings, right? And it's like, sometimes it's one of those things you notice, and it's like,
wait a second, you can be a missionary and have multiple piercings? Like, are you even supposed to be out here in the field right now? Like,
you must be apostate. You don't have a testimony.
Because that's I think a lot of us have those just natural, instinctive feelings and thoughts, and then we have to check ourselves. Like, wait, what are we doing there? And I will say that sometimes the judgment does come verbally, right? And maybe not even purposefully. So, for instance, I can say, let's say I'm hanging out with the missionaries that have multiple piercings, and I don't have any piercings, but for the sake of this argument, for some reason the topic comes up, and I say, well, I don't have any piercings because I think I'm not supposed to have any piercings, and it's better to not have any piercings. Okay, well, how do you think that the missionary that has multiple piercings feels as I'm saying that? Even though I'm just saying what I really genuinely might feel and believe, it comes across as this judgment like, oh, I actually, not only do I think that the piercings are a bad thing, but I think that I'm superior than you. I'm better than you because I have chosen to follow this line. Or we can go back to eating, for instance, like that. Maybe that more applies to the differences between you and me rather than my piercings. But if I say, well, I'm gonna eat my hamburger because it's better for me. It's healthier.
Then I'll feel like.
Or you do the same thing. Like I'm not going to eat the meat because my salad is a healthier choice. Like, well then, so do you think that my choice is not healthy because of that? Right, you see how saying things certain ways can come across as judgmental, even if we're not necessarily trying to. We're just trying to promote ourself or our beliefs. So I think it is important to make sure that while we advocate for ourselves and stand up for ourselves, making sure that we're not verbally having that kind of judgment coming across as judgmental towards other people.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Absolutely. So another vein of this, and when we think of specific principles, like some things maybe aren't specific principles but are just cultural too, or there's like so in our ward there's been a large shift. We've had several people that have swapped from public schools to homeschool. And initially, the first people that started homeschooling kind of felt like the oddballs, right? But then you get enough people homeschooling, and now it's like, feels like it's this cultural shift, and like, well, I guess all the good moms are homeschooling, and all the other moms aren't. And it's like, no. We need to we need to keep that type of understanding, or we need to push that out of our minds, because God can direct some to stay in the schools, and he can direct some to homeschool. That's not a gospel principle. One of those, neither one is the core gospel principle.
Right.
What the core gospel principle is that we love and teach and educate our children and bring them up in the ways of the Lord. And the Lord might guide us in different ways because of all of our different needs. The application can be very different.
Definitely. I totally agree with that. And that's a great example, because I look at all of the moms in both of our wards that have homeschooled versus public, and there are some fantastic women on both sides of that argument. And if I weren't even looking at their kids, I'd just pluck them out. I wouldn't be able to tell you necessarily who's teaching at home or who's got their kids in public school. I would just be able to tell you, you are an awesome, awesome human being, and have great testimony, and that's what really matters, right? Is their testimonies, who they are, rather than how they're doing specific things.
And there can be this worry that there is this little bit of tension between those that are, in homeschool versus public schools, and we need to do everything we can. There's going to be natural barriers there, just because the kids go to different schools, and so the kids might just not know each other as well. On the parent side, the homeschool parents get together more often than the other parents, so they might know each other better. And so, we have to be very conscious of this and strive to include everyone as much as possible. But kind of a similar thing, a couple of homeschool people might be together, and there might be one public school mom there, and the homeschoolers, are talking about their homeschool stuff, and they're not trying to be malicious or mean or bad. It's just what they like to talk about and what they're talking about. But the public school mom might feel like, oh, I don't fit in here, or I don't, and anyway, we need to be patient with each other. We need to be firm in the principles that we choose to follow.
Yep.
And you know what? Maybe we are really insecure about where we're at, and maybe we do need to change.
I think a lot of us are, more than we really want to admit, that we are more insecure in a lot of those things. So last time we talked about fence laws, and this is really kind of a continuation of that conversation to a certain extent. But I think one thing that has been coming to my mind as I've been just thinking about the fences, and we can have two different opinions. The idea that you may want this fence, you may want the thing, that the rule, the guideline, and I may want the open space.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, we can both love the same field, right? And I think that's the key, is finding the love and the care for who we are and where we are, in this journey of life, regardless of what rules we're following. Sometimes those rules change, those fences move, disappear, whatever it is, and like you mentioned at the beginning, I think there's two opposite reactions. One can be, you can be a rule holder, where you're holding on to these rules and say, back in my day I did this, and this is how we're going to do it. And those kinds of people, I think, can feel superior to people that are not holding on to the rules, and often connect strong faith with following strict rules. But on the flip side of that, you've got a rule reliever, which I think I probably fall into a little bit more, where we can often confuse less rules, less fences, with more freedom. You say, well, there's less rules, so now I can do whatever I want. And that's not necessarily the case. It's we still have to have some kind of structure, but the structure is not given to us. It's not forced upon us. And the rule reliever, the people that are relieved by lack of rules, I would say, have can kind of mock the caution of the people that have the fences. That you're too afraid to cross that bridge. You're too afraid to get one or two steps closer, even though you can be totally free in this place. I'm going to mock you for that's where that judgment comes into play, I think. And so then because of that judgment, a rule reliever will feel as if those that are keeping hold to the strict rules, we count them as like the Pharisees and Sadducees, right? And what we learn in the scriptures is that Christ came to fulfill the law, and Christ is a perfect example of what we're talking about, where he came. The law, the rule of Moses was so strict, the way the Pharisees lived their lives that when Christ came and fulfilled the law, it simplified life so much. In fact, that's one of the things he taught was love your neighbor. What we're getting at here is love God and love yourself, love your neighbor. And that was really kind of it. Everything else will fall under that umbrella. And so I would say the third type of person that we should all be trying to become, and what we're getting at here, is the person of charity, the person that can find charity and love for everybody, regardless of what decisions, what actions they're living their life by, and make room for them while still having your own fence, your own personal guardrails. And that's tricky.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of the point of life, is figuring out where you fit into the whole grand scheme of things while working with others around you to get to that end goal.
And sometimes you might feel like you view someone else, who's being strict,
Mm-hmm.
and because you would feel restricted by living those principles, you feel like, wow, they must be really restricted.
We project it onto them.
But in many cases, they don't feel restricted. They feel very, very at peace and content with that, and that's good and fine. And it is true. So this is where it also becomes tricky, is that not all applications are equal.
Mm-hmm.
There will be many who apply the gospel in not so good ways. And because the church is going to be less specific, there will be a little bit more, when teaching or preaching in front, like you may not necessarily be able to point to the church and say, the church has this guideline or this rule. Instead, which should have been done the whole time, we will have to teach the core doctrines, the core eternal principles,
Right.
and let people govern themselves, which is, that's one of my favorite quotes from Joseph Smith. I teach them correct principles and let men govern themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that gets into a good point, because there are times when interpretations can be incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And in those cases, correction is needed.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to come from a place of love and caring. But I do think that it is important to recognize that sometimes we have incorrect interpretations, even if we feel we've gotten a specific inspiration on it. Sometimes we have a lack of understanding. We're all learning together, and so nobody here is perfect. So the reason I bring that up is just that when you see somebody that's doing something that you feel strongly about that is incorrect, I do think that it's okay to broach the topic and say, maybe just ask, why are you doing things a certain way? Come from a loving place, and maybe you'll be surprised and you think, oh, okay, I see your point. By all means, keep doing it. And maybe you say, can I share my perspective? Let me give you some insights, and maybe you'll help change somebody. But I think that it's important that if something is actually wrong, that's where we do need to stand up for what is right. We don't always have to give our opinion. Not every opinion needs to be heard, but in times where truth is being taken out of the equation, then we do need to be brave and stand up for what's right.
I like your thought of, when you do notice something, being inquisitive, right? Curious instead of confrontational.
Right.
And oftentimes just the curiosity will open them up enough that as they explain something, it might hit them, and they kind of feel that inner conflict of like, yeah, that doesn't quite match up. Mm-hmm. But this is a maturational process, and this is what I love about this. Obedience is far too often kind of viewed as this thing that you just have to willpower yourself to do what's right. Mm-hmm. But obedience is a direct result of our faith and our trust in God. And the stronger our relationship to our Heavenly Father and to our Savior, the more naturally we will just want to and choose to do what's right. That is really what comes first. Now, as we keep commandments that are truly God-given and core principle-based, then yes, that strengthens our testimony of those core principles. But we are fallen man, and there are so many things that we don't fully understand. We're very prideful. We like to think we know it all. And because we think we know it all, we're not always humble in recognizing that that we don't always know best. But that's part of, that's our purpose here in life, is to progress and to learn and to mature spiritually. And we need to give ourselves and our friends and our neighbors, fellow church members, some grace in that maturational process. Because far too often we are not inquisitive, and we are, so here's one, right? So, we've promoted the truth of the family proclamation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know many people within the church who view the proclamation as a changeable teaching. I know many Latter-day Saints who would love temple sealings to include sealings of same-sex unions. And right off the bat, when I see that, it's like the big guardrails go up. It's like, I don't want to. I disagree with that.
Yeah.
And we don't always communicate very well across with each other. But having this discussion, like asking those questions of like, how in your mind does this square with church teaching? Like what core principles of the gospel lead you to think that is a likely future for the church?
Yeah.
And sometimes you're surprised at the responses people come up with, and you can still disagree with them. I do disagree with most of those. However, in their, in some people's mind, they can make that argument. Now, they and we need to stay humble. And far too often I have seen many who get to a certain point where they've become so misaligned that eventually they leave the church because the church is not conforming to what they want.
Right.
And that's the worry and the concern, is we don't want that. But the only way to combat that is to root ourselves in Christ and in his prophets and in the scriptures and in the core teachings of his faith, and strive to align with that. So people often, the application of same-sex, or the application of our definition of marriage, some of those people I've talked with, they view it as an application,
not the doctrine,
not a doctrine. And I think that's where a lot of the biggest mistakes happen, is when we misinterpret core doctrine with applications.
And when you're having those conversations, it's important to assume sincerity. Like if I go into it assuming, this comes back to the humility, right? If I assume that you are sincere in what you're doing, then we can have a more productive, loving, caring conversation. But if I come into it assuming you're trying to do something just out of rebelliousness or out of haughtiness, then I'm going to come at it a totally different way, and that's not going to be productive for either one of us. Something that I've wrestled with myself is, I'm going to go back to kind of the fence idea, the fence laws, is when those fences are gone, what kind of a person am I? What kind of a person are you? Like how I think when the checklist disappears, I think that reveals your true character when the first strength of youth things are gone, or when we don't have the church telling us to do every single little thing in the handbook the specific way. It reveals our true character as far as what kind of real conversion do we have individually, and that's I think can be really a beautiful thing. It can be very humbling as we realize, like you said, we don't know everything, and more often than not, we have a lot more to learn and to work on. But that is the beauty of life and the gospel of Jesus Christ, is that we get the chance to learn, and we get the chance to change and grow. And as we get rid of these checklist type policies and rules, doesn't mean we can't still live by those rules and policies that we have in the past, but we get to actually ingratiate them into our into ourselves as who we are, not what we do. And I love that concept of being someone rather than just doing something that I've been told to do.
Did you really just pull out the word ingratiate?
I did.
Wow, that was awesome.
And it wasn't written on my notes.
It wasn't
either.
even written in your notes. You got a smart guy right here.
The question is, did I use it appropriately?
I have no idea what it means. That's okay. I'm sure you used it perfectly.
We'll put the definition in the comments below for
go.
everybody.
So, ultimately, we're all learning.
Yep.
We're all growing. We need to have charity in our hearts for all people. We need to seek to help all people be rooted in the core teachings and doctrines of the plan of salvation and of our Savior Jesus Christ and our Heavenly Father. They are the arbiters of truth. We are simply seeking to align ourselves with that truth. And regardless of how far off, sometimes I think it's easier for us to give grace to those that are not members of our church than it is for us to give grace to those that are in our church.
Definitely.
And as time goes on, this is something we are going to need. We are going to need to have more grace for those in our church, because we are going to see more and more variability of application of the gospel. But that doesn't mean that we just give up and don't worry about application ourselves. Yep. We can hold to our own personal applications, and in some cases those will be tighter and stricter, and in some cases they will be less strict. We haven't had an example of less strict. Any examples of less strict?
Of less strict.
My family is historically been very strict in our choice of media. Mm-hmm. And it's good for us. But sometimes we're still strict in our what types of media we let our children and even us see and hear and watch. But sometimes there's specific niches where it's like, actually, this used to seem wrong to me, but now it feels okay. So, for example, like realism or gore, specifically when it's not glorifying the gore, but when it's either historical or when it's teaching a good moral values or scripture stories or things of that nature that really bring things to life, is something that in the past we would not have watched certain things that have that, but as of late we have, and that they've been beautiful, and we like them. We don't feel like they, I think we used to kind of have the view that gore in and of itself was kind of bad or evil,
right?
And we've kind of laxed on that.
It doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah.
We talked about another one last week, and a difference between you and me is our Sunday dress.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's an easy, kind of lighter topic to that can be interpreted differently, and I don't think it's even just church either. We've seen this kind of cultural trend in the way that we dress over the last several years. Church-wise, it used to be you wear your Sunday, you get up in the morning, you get ready for church, you wear your Sunday church clothes, and you wear those all day long. And now it's not necessarily pushed that hard. Sometimes that freedom can be what we view as freedom. We can have that pendulum effect where we go so far. So I'm thinking of just culturally, like how many times I go to the airport and people are in like the weirdest clothes because they're just there to fly, and so they're like in their pajamas basically. And I know that there have been plenty of people out in society as a whole that are like, that's just not appropriate. And you can argue whether or not that's appropriate for flying on an airplane or showing up to the grocery store or a sit-down restaurant in your PJs. But there are social trends that we can see a shift in what is accepted and what is normalized, and we have to kind of come to terms with, is that, am I doing it again? Am I doing that just because that's what the social trend is, or is it because I have an actual, personal opinion on why I'm wearing the clothes that I'm wearing? And I have different reasonings for myself, but I think that sometimes we can take things too far, and I tend to agree with people that maybe you don't show up to the grocery store in your PJs, and maybe it's ideal to show up to a sit-down restaurant a little bit nicer dressed. But there are different ways you can manage that, as restaurants can have their own dress codes and things like that, and some do. You're right, and but that's just another example that kind of came to mind.
I mean, modesty in its broader application is speaking and dressing in appropriate ways, and what is deemed as appropriate can change over time, or decency, what is considered decent can certainly change over time. So anything else?
I think that about wraps it up. I guess one of my key takeaways: one, we need to be more loving and grace-giving to the people around us. Two, your own personal conscience does not equal somebody else's commandment. So just because you choose to live your life one way does not mean that somebody else has to live that way as well. They can choose to do so, but we each have to have our own individual clarity and inspiration, and be firm in our principles. Stand firm in our principles, and don't back down just because social trends occur or shift or change, because they're going to do that no matter what. And if you just change because of the trends, you're going to be changing your whole life.
And there may be some things that you do change because you feel inclined to, or you're curious. And some of those things you might feel really good about, and some of those things you might not. At which point, you can switch back.
And that brings clarity, right?
Exactly. It brings clarity. Give yourself some license to spiritually mature, to not be perfect, but to strive to follow the Lord. As long as your heart is there, you have that broken heart, that contrite spirit. In many cases, we think of any disobedience as rebellion, and it's not. Most disobedience, at least for members of the church, I think most disobedience is just from either being tired or weak in the moment, or there's various reasons. We cave to social pressures or just want to look good, And not that that's good that we disobeyed, but it's not active rebellion either. When our heart, the condition of our heart, is seeking the Lord, then when we have those experiences, we will learn from them, and we will naturally grow into who the Lord wants us to be.
So what can you do to grow and change, and what can you do to find your own clarity as you are maybe taking some time to self-reflect on why you do the things that you do, how you live your life? Are you doing them just because everybody else says to, or are you doing them because you have a clear meaning behind it? And as you go through that self-reflection, you might find some things you want to adjust, and that's great. As we wrap things up, we hope that you'll like and subscribe and share this video and our podcast with your friends and family. We want to inspire more people and really just get people talking. We're not necessarily saying that everybody has to believe every single thing that we say. I'm not perfect, and I'm learning just as much as the next person.
I'm sure we get it wrong plenty too.
But we hope that our conversations and discussion give you some insight and maybe give you a little bit of thought-provoking ideas to take home with you. So share that with your friends and family, and we'll see you next time.
This is the No Bushel Podcast.